Good afternoon, everybody. I think we'll make a start. Can I welcome you all to this meeting of the County Council's Audit and Accounts Committee, particularly members of the public sitting at the back and any members of the press or public who are watching on the YouTube channel. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. But can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. A couple of housekeeping points. Toilets are available in the corridor adjacent to this room on my left-hand side. And I will briefly adjourn the meeting after 2 hours for a comfort break if we're still going after 2 hours. There's no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will all make our way downstairs and out of the main entrance. The muster point is on the green opposite the main entrance as you would have come in, or many of you would have come in. I propose to waive the committee procedure rule limiting members' contributions to the debate. However, we have a lot of business to get through, so I would urge all members to keep their contributions concise. And back to the beginning of the agenda. Dawn, do we have any apologies?
We have apologies from councillors Whelan and Maguire. We have councillors Murphy and Simon King substituting respectively. We've also had late apologies from councillor Alan Sharp.
Okay, thank you and welcome. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? And I know councillor Murphy does.
It's really in the interest of complete transparency. May I please mention that I am a member of the Pension Fund Committee, and so rather like Councillor Whelan, I feel that I need to mention that because pension management is discussed, well, particularly in the minutes. But also I am the shareholder representative of LGSS, or Pathfinders as it's now known. And although I can't see how there could be a conflict of interest there, as the shareholder is the County Council, I just thought I should mention it, as Pathfinders mentioned quite frequently in the reports.
Thank you. And Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Graham. Yes, I am also a member of the Pension Fund Committee, but I'd like to declare a non-pecuniary interest in agenda item 7. And I would like it recorded for the minutes that I will not participate in the debate, nor will I vote in that, because I'm a member of the Audit Registration Committee of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, and they regulate the ability of audit firms to be able to audit within the United Kingdom. So it would look a bit strange if I were to participate in that debate, so I shan't. And just in case anyone wonders how I can continue to deal with the fact that EY are in front of us, I've recused myself from anything to do with EY at the Audit Registration Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Councillor King.
I'm not sure if I need to declare this, but for the sake of completeness, I'm a member of the Cambridge Pension Board.
Thank you. Nobody else. Okay, thank you very much. So we move on to the minutes of the last meeting. We're asked to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 28th of September as an accurate record. If any committee member wants to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes, can they do so now, please? I see no objections, so we will take that as carried unanimously. And on that basis, are committee members happy to approve the minutes as written? And yeah, thank you. So on that basis, the recommendation to approve the minutes is carried. An updated action log was also included in the published papers. Are there any updates or questions on this, or can we take it as noted? Does anybody wish to raise anything? No? Okay, thank you. So we move on now to item 5, which is the report on the use of regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000. And can I ask Ben Stevenson, who is the Data Protection Officer and Head of Information Governance, to present this report? Ben.
Thank you, Chair. The report's to give members of this committee an overview of the regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, or RIPA, which is easier for me to say. We come each year to update you on the use of those powers, update policy and procedures following inspections. And I've set out in the report the kind of times when we may undertake covert surveillance, often by the Trading Standards Service of the County Council, looking into, say, counterfeit goods, or in districts and Peterborough City Council fly tipping. We are limited in what we can do in covert surveillance. We do have to get judicial approval from a magistrate before we undertake any. And that includes the using of CCTV, subscriber data, or a covert human intelligence source. As you'll notice, we haven't used covert surveillance powers in the last 12 months. I know, Chair, you asked me about test purchasers previously, and I did get an update from Trading Standards that obviously the effect of the pandemic has focused their attention elsewhere, but test purchases are things they are planning for the coming year, and that they're happy to receive any intelligence from members of the committee or the public that could help them direct their resources appropriately. Part of the reason for this report as well is that we had an inspection in January and February this year by the Office of the Surveillance Commissioner. There was a very positive report, either Appendix A or Appendix B to the papers, but there were some changes we wanted to make to that policy to update it, improve the guidance for our officers, particularly when we're not using the powers. So often the policy and the procedure becomes very important. And I've listed in the report the kind of changes we've made, which range from just improving guidance and helping officers understand their role and what they should consider, social media, around data protection and making sure we're compliant there, and one of updating of a job title. That's really very few changes, but it made a stronger policy for our officers to use, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ben. And that's a very comprehensive report that you provided us with. Thank you. And comments? Any comments from anybody?
Just thank you, Chair. No, I just wanted to say that I'll take these out. I can hear myself. All I want to say was that was very interesting report. I actually enjoyed reading it, and that was one of the questions I was thinking of, Chair, was with what you brought to the Ben's thoughts were, you know, what we, you know, surveillance wise, you know, test purchases, etc. But yeah, I understand within the COVID period, it wasn't part of the agenda. But yeah, thank you very much. Really enjoyed that report.
Other comments from anybody? Can I just raise one thing about the letter, which I think is on page 81, and it refers, I think, on 81 or 82 about further research into social media. So near the bottom of page 81, it was clear that they are alive to the possibility of online social media research being carried out. And I didn't raise this when we had a pre-meet, but I just wonder if you describe a little bit more about what that means.
I think in the past, and I suppose the context of me providing this report is I used to be the fraud manager at Peterborough City Council. So I did this for Peterborough and I've inherited it at Cambridgeshire. In the past, we would have quite traditional methods of investigating, but the growth of the internet, the growth of social media, means you can do a lot of investigating without leaving your desk. You can gather information from Facebook, from Twitter, from any number of sources that are available to you. But there is a point at which doing research crosses over into covert directed surveillance. And that is something we've put out messages to staff to explain. There's a point where you really need to consider RIPA, because just because something is a public setting, the more times you go back to it, the more times it becomes directed surveillance on somebody. So it is a growth area of concern, I think, in every public authority, because it's very easy for staff to simply Google somebody, pick up their details from Facebook, and then start to use that. So it's making sure our officers understand when perhaps some background research becomes a little bit more.
Thank you. And certainly the case studies that you gave with legal examples was very interesting to show the boundaries that you have and when you might cross them and not. Okay, no other comments from anybody. So we received the updated RIPA policy and note the use of powers contained within it, although we haven't used it this year. We don't need to put that in, but well, that's the fact. Okay, thank you. We're now into the external auditors value for money conclusion for the year ending 31st of March 2018. And I welcome Elisa Blake and Barry Pryke of BDO. Would you care to introduce your report? And yes, thank you, Barry. Just point to the bit that needs to press, and then your red light should come on. And if it doesn't, Dawn is coming round and she will bounce it and make sure it does.
Thank you, Chairman. Perhaps if I could give some, because this has been a report or a piece of work that has taken some time to complete, perhaps I could begin, if you don't mind, with a short bit of context as to where we've come from and why we're here reporting in this way. And then Barry can take us through the report itself, and then both of us will be happy to answer questions at the end if that suits. So the context is that in the years 2017-18, 2017 and 2018, related to the financial years 2016-17 and 2017-18. Mr. Mason, a local elector, raised some objections in response to the draft accounts that were produced by the council. It is our responsibility, as at that time being the appointed auditor for the council, to look into the matters that are brought to our attention by local electors and other agencies, and to, where a formal objection is lodged by a local elector, to consider the nature of that objection and whether it is valid or not, and what our response will be when an objection is deemed to be valid. We take objections very seriously, and the nature of the allegations made by Mr. Mason in both years were quite complex and wide-ranging. What we did at that time was to, if you like, implement a stand-back test, because one of the areas of the objections that Mr. Mason raised in both years, in fact, was in relation to procurement arrangements and tendering procedures in various forms and various parts of those arrangements. We had also had other matters brought to our attention during our preliminary discussions and inquiries as part of progressing our review into the matters that Mr. Mason raised. And so it was clear to us that we needed to ensure that we were making sure we were standing back and looking at the bigger picture on procurement arrangements and tendering arrangements operated by the council during the years in question. to make sure that we weren't just taking information that had in fact been either brought to our attention or in fact reported. Some weaknesses had already been reported by, for example, internal audit, to make sure that those weaknesses weren't systemic and that there wasn't a material issue to be addressed when thinking about giving either the financial statements opinion or the value for money conclusion in both of those years. For 2016-17, the nature of the objections were ring-fenced in the procurement sense to looking at the V4 contract. And we were able to satisfy ourselves that the V4 contract was not material to the financial statements. And in fact, at that time, there was no other knowledge that we had that led us to believe there could be a wider systemic issue. So we did issue the value for money conclusion for 2016-17. In 2017-18, there were various other things going on that I'm sure the committee will remember. A long investigation by PKF Littlejohn into contracting for transport, community transport, in fact, and there were other reports being brought by internal audit relating to various aspects of procurement arrangements that were highlighting weaknesses in different places. So it was clear that we felt that all of that information overlapped with our responsibilities under the value for money conclusion for 2017-18, and wanted to be sure that, as I said, there wasn't a systemic issue here or something that was material by nature. So we entered into reviews of various parts of work, which is all explained in the report, so I won't go into that in detail, but also into a piece of work ourselves, looking at all of the material contracts let by the council that were still operating during 2017-18, which is the year in which we needed to give that value for money conclusion about the adequacy of the arrangements in place. It was long and detailed, required a significant amount of time from senior members of the team and also other relevant specialists, including technical accounting specialists and lawyers, indeed, as you will have read in the report. We've been very thorough because we need to be sure, because we take this seriously, as does the council, that we get this right. We have now concluded that work. And it is reported to you here, so Barry will go through the nature of the results. But if I could just touch on the next steps. The next steps after today are to issue the VFM conclusion for 2017-18. Some of the matters that we're reporting today are relevant to the objections that Mr. Mason has raised. We've already responded verbally to various parts of those objections, clarifying to Mr. Mason that we won't be taking any further action or doing other work on those areas, but this does make a difference. So we need to close down other matters and formalise our response to Mr. Mason's objections for both years in what's known as a statement of reasons. And we will then, after we've issued the statement of reasons and concluded the objections, we will issue the audit certificates that close the audits formally and finally for 2016-17 and 2017-18. So if I could hand over to Barry for the report.
Thank you. So the report in front of you, as Lisa's just alluded to, provides some detail behind the context that Lisa's just provided. I will take the report as read, but I will take the committee through some of the key parts of that report. And as Lisa said, we'll be happy to take any questions at the end of it. So page 5 of our report, page 87 of your agenda pack, provides a summary of the value for money risks that we'd identified at the start of this piece of work. I should also highlight that we did bring a report to this committee in July 2018. And you'll note, as you've read through the report, that we have reproduced the text that was included in that report in respect of the first 2 value for money risks, so sustainable deployment of resources and revenue generation. And that's really just to provide the initial findings and also to give some context for the update against those 2 risks. At the time we reported in July 2018, the procurement risk had been identified, but the work was at a very early stage. So there was no detail reported in July 2018. So all of the narrative in the report in relation to the procurement risk is new and falls out of the work that Lisa's just described. Taking the first two risks, so sustainable deployment of resources and revenue generation, although they were both identified as significant value for money risks, both the work that was performed back in 2017-18 and the updates that we've undertaken, which is reflected in this report. The update really takes us to sort of the summer of this year and has involved document reviews just to make sure that there's nothing that has happened since we issued that report in July 2018 that would give us any cause for concern over the arrangements in place during 2017-18. And again, I'd just like to reiterate that our focus is on the arrangements in place in 17-18. I'm pleased to say in terms of those two risks, nothing has come out of our update work that gives us any cause for concern. And as I say, that's reflected in the report. The procurement section of the report, which is page 12 of our report and begins on page 94 of your agenda pack, is the piece of work that has been ongoing and that we've now concluded on. So pages 94 and 95 of the agenda pack summarise the results of that particular piece of work. In terms of those results, the work that we undertook, the review of material contracts, and looking at the documentation behind those contracts to determine whether or not they'd been procured in accordance with the council's rules. As you can see, there were a number of findings coming out of that, and I'll talk to some of the detail of that shortly. I would just like to start by highlighting that the contract procedure rules that were in place, so the formal document available to officers to support them in procuring contracts, included all of the relevant requirements that we would expect to see. So the underlying documented process was there. In the instances that we've highlighted in our report, those procedures were not followed, the procedure, it was not possible for the council to demonstrate that those procedures had been followed. In terms of the results, I'll summarise the key points. So the work that we did identified two contracts where it wasn't possible to obtain evidence to demonstrate that the contracting procedure rules in place in this document maintained by the council had been adhered to. And that also resulted in breach of what was EU procurement law. So the procurement law that was relevant at the time the contracts were procured. In the case of the V4 contract, as our report highlights, the matters in relation to that had already been reported to this committee back in November 2018 as part of a piece of work that internal audit did. And our report hasn't sought to reproduce that work. We have highlighted that work was done and the detail is obviously publicly available via the committee pages on the council's website. In terms of the second contract, the winter gritting contract, our review identified that the tender process hadn't been undertaken in accordance with the rules. So the council had approached a number of potential contractors directly rather than going through a formal tender process. The waiver process, so the system in place to gain authorisation if it is necessary to breach the council's contract procedure rules, it wasn't possible for the council to demonstrate that was followed at the time. And also as a result of the value of the contract, which runs over a number of years, the total value of that contract was in excess of the threshold above which the tender should have been advertised in the Open Journal for the EU. So as a result of the outcome of that work, we consulted with our legal advisors to gain their view on the extent to which both the lack of tender process, formal tender process for the two contracts I've referred to, and the fact that there was an apparent breach of EU procurement law, what the potential implications for that were. And again, they're set out in the narrative in our report. And I think it's worth noting that the report highlights this, that there are currently two legal schools of thought on whether such breaches of procurement process and procurement law could lead to items of account in the council's financial statements that are contrary to law. And our report talks through that process, and as a result of working through with our legal advisors, we aren't proposing to take the items to the High Court for a determination that the items are contrary to law, recognising the different legal opinions that are currently out there in this particular area, and also taking into account the nature of the contracts and where they're currently at, either in the case of the consulting contract, no longer in place, and with the econ contract, I believe only 1 year to run. So that's a kind of a summary, if you like, of the outcome of our work and the issues that it identified. Off the back of those issues being identified, again, you'll see in our report from page 99 through to 104 of your agenda pack, we've raised a number of recommendations. There is a separate paper on this agenda where the council has considered those recommendations and outlined their response. I think it's important to note while we've discussed our recommendations with the council, what we have not sought to do is validate what the council has included in their report in terms of the actions taken. And we would look to the committee to take a view on how they would like to do that going forward. But as I say, that is a separate paper on the agenda item. As a result of the findings, our VFM conclusion for the year ending 31st of March 2018 will be an except for conclusion. So it is qualified in respect of the matters that we've identified. On page 107 of your agenda pack is the draft value for money conclusion. It explains the reasons for the except for conclusion, and that reflects the issues identified earlier on in our report. You'll see that particular section of the report is highlighted as being subject to confirmation by our technical team, and that is still the case. After this committee, we will look to get the wording confirmed, but I'm not expecting any significant changes to that. And the key point is, as I say, it's an except for conclusion. I didn't want to say anything else. I don't know if Lisa wants to add anything. If not, then we're happy to take any questions that the committee may have.
Okay, can I open it up to questions, comments? Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. I assume we're just on 6A. We haven't got to 6B yet. Fine. I fully accept the report which has been produced by BDO. I accept all of the findings that they've come up with, including the comments that they make about the lack of materiality and the lack of legal consequence of these two breaches. Despite that, I have to say that it's difficult to understate the importance of what has been reported to us today, the potential consequences as well. And we've got two clear breaches which have been brought to our attention, one of which we already knew about, but they actually occurred in slightly different ways. One of the occurrences was because of effectively of the consultancy services. There was a cumulative effect of continued supply of services and some change of scope as well. And that I can understand why that may not have been picked up Still inexcusable that it wasn't picked up, but I can understand why, because actually keeping track of all of that is not an easy thing. It is something officers must do, but it's not an easy thing to do. So I can understand that, but the consequence was inexcusable. The other one, the gritting exercise, really was appalling. And that's something which actually came before members as well, at least the spokes for the Highways Committee. They had sight of that, and it just wasn't spotted. Now, obviously, officers would normally be expected to point out such things, but I'm really disappointed that members, who will be senior members being the spokes on those committees, that members also seemed to be unaware of the potential consequences of a contract such as this being determined in the way that it was. And I think that, and this will come up in the next item 6B, but I think that we need to be aware that these failings took place, including failings of members, and we need to consider how can we ensure that this doesn't happen again. So I think it's extremely useful that this has been brought before us today. I don't seek to excuse what happened in either case, although you can explain at least one of them. And we are just fortunate that the council didn't suffer substantially more serious legal consequences from our failings. We're just fortunate there. And let's utilize that good fortune to make sure that we put things into place in future, which mean that not merely from the officer side, but also from the member side, that there is far greater awareness than there has been in the past. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Can I just throw in a couple? How confident are you that there are only these 2 contracts that weren't following the procedure rules is one question. So, secondly, you've made various recommendations, but about the future, which is right. But do you have any views picking up on what Councillor Bowden has said about what we should be doing with members and officers who failed to follow perfectly reasonable procedures?
Thank you, Chair. So on the first matter, in terms of the confidence around these being the only 2 breaches, there are 2 things I think that's clear that need to be separated there. We can't be confident that these were the only 2 breaches in all of the procurement exercises that the council entered into that were relevant to 2017-18. But what we can be relatively confident about, because of the way that we structured our audit work, is that we did look at all of the contracts that were material to the accounts of the council for 2017-18. So we can be reasonably confident that there's no material impact. All of the contracts that were material, of all of those, these were the only 2 where we identified this depth of issue, or certainly the issue in relation to breaching procurement law. Have to be careful how you phrase the things, but breaching procurement law. There were other contracts that demonstrated other weaknesses, which we haven't highlighted by name, but they are implied in the recommendations that we've made, and also the recommendations that Internal Audit have made in their reports relevant to that year. So there's 2 separate things there. We can't be confident that you know about all breaches, but we can be confident that we've looked at all material contracts. On the second matter, I think it would be inappropriate actually for me to comment on procedure in terms of action that the council might decide to take in relation to any officers or members, or that really is the council's reserve. That's not within my remit, and it would be inappropriate for me to suggest otherwise. I think we've made all the recommendations that we think it's appropriate to make, and I'm confident that the council has responded robustly to those recommendations, and has, in the conversations that we have had with the executive, they have listened to all of the matters that we've raised and responded to all of them in what we consider to be appropriate way. But it would be useful, I think, for the committee to be assured sometime down the line that the responses have been validated by, for example, internal audit as being in place and not just aspirational.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to ask Neil, Tom, and Mark whether you wish to make any comments about the BDO findings, particularly as Neil, internal audits work around that time was mentioned, whether you agree with these findings, whether there's anything else that you'd wish to add, and then perhaps same with Tom and Mark without moving on to, and this is what you're going to do next.
I think it's a straightforward yes. I fully support the findings from the report and the recommendations to improve procedures. That takes it's taken from our internal audit report of the past as well, so it's welcome.
Okay, Tom.
Yeah, Chair, I'll say a bit more in a moment about the steps the council is taking in response, but we accept the findings from BDO.
And Mark, does this affect any of the work that you're now engaged in without going on to what you were talking to me earlier about?
Okay, so the committee will be aware that we have not commenced our value for money work in respect of 2018-19, 2019-20, or indeed 2020-21, because we were rightly waiting for BDO to conclude their work, and given the significance of their findings and the actions, I think that is demonstrated today, but clearly we'll need to follow up on all of their findings through each of those years and the impact it has on our responsibilities in respect to value for money for those years.
Okay, thank you very much. In which case, shall we move on then to Tom and the County Council's response and proposed actions? Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Just first of all, as well, I'll introduce my colleague Henry Swan, who I think is joining us remotely. He's the acting head of procurement at the moment and may come in on some of the questions. Chair, as we've heard, as a result of the procurement weaknesses detected in 2015 and 2016, the council will receive a qualified conclusion on value for money on an accept for basis. The issues detected, we acknowledge, are serious. And in our report at 6B, we set out the steps the council is taking in response. First of all, I'd know the committee will be particularly concerned, as Councillor Bowden has already expressed, with regard to the winter gritting econ contracts. That's a frontline service and a contract that is still in force today. At section 2.4, we've set out our assessment following external legal advice of the standing of that contract, and take comfort from the fact that it hasn't been challenged under the ineffectiveness procedure, that there are ongoing private law obligations to the contractor, and the council is acting within its powers, and that we are close to the successor contract coming into force early next year. But I agree with Councillor Bowden that that doesn't detract from this being a serious issue, and the council has been fortunate in some respects that those weaknesses didn't crystallise or bite earlier in the history of the contract. In terms of applying the findings and the recommendations as they face us, some time has obviously elapsed and the council's arrangements have moved on since the original errors in 2015 and 2016. As we've already heard, the consultancy spend issues were detected by our own internal auditors and reported in 2018 to this committee, and BDO's findings reinforce those conclusions. And clearly we've had 3 years to implement improvements since that time. We set out in the report on a point-by-point basis the improvements and steps that continue to be taken in relation to each of BDO's recommendations. I would summarise the situation across 3 kind of key headings. First of all, there's been systematic improvements. So our contract register now sits as part of our accounting system in ERP Gold, which is also used for resource and workforce management. That means it's readily available to contract managers, and there is a much harder link between expenditure leaving the organisation, amounts recorded on the ledger, included in our financial forecasts, and onto the contract register itself. The waiver and exemption process is handled in a completely different way, which is digitally recorded. Those workflow from contract managers to chief officers to Henry as head of procurement to myself, and where appropriate to the monitoring officer as well, dependent on value and length of contract. The second theme I'd highlight is that we have a stronger voice and weight for the procurement function than we did in 2015 and 2016. This is evidenced by the sign-off of all committee reports by the head of procurement, which is a very well established process. And more recently, with the disbanding of LGSS, the team has a clear focus on CCC and now reports into my directorate as the Section 151 officer for Cambridgeshire. And the third key theme I'd emphasise, and this is important when we need to ensure that there is compliance across a large number of contract managers across a complex organisation like the council, is that we've increased emphasis on communications and training. And we see that both in 2017 and 2018 when the initial issues were detected, and we've reinforced that this year as we've been working on with BDO on these conclusions as they emerged. Looking ahead, we've heard reference already to the further assurance that will be needed to oversee that the improvements we say are already in place have settled down or are effective, and that the steps we'll take going forward are also brought to fruition. We've already asked internal audit to begin looking at that work, and that will be reported back to this committee in due course. And as we've heard from our current external auditor, it will also form part of the value for money considerations for the subsequent years. We have updates to the contract procedure rules scheduled that follow the recommendations of BDO. There's a recommendation around mandatory training for officers, which we will take forward. That is something we haven't implemented to date and will take some time to do, but we are committed to doing it. And I see the committee has an amendment before it today, which it makes clear, and we would have done this anyway, but it's right to take it into the recommendations that there will be reporting back to this committee on the progress with the recommendations. So then just turning lastly to next steps, these are obviously difficult findings for the council looking backwards, but I'm pleased we have now received this report and can move forwards. The recommendations recognise that this is a serious matter and invite the committee to bring this matter to the attention of full council through your annual report. And as I say, we'll report back to this committee in detail as we progress on the matters highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Any comments on what Tom has outlined? The one recommendation that we've talked about from Councillor Bowden was the involvement of members in the gritting contract. And I just wonder whether there should be a reminder to members of the procurement rules and procedures that we're adopting. May not have to be mandatory, but anybody who's got an interest in procurement should be expected to get involved, I would suggest. So that they can challenge the officers at appropriate times. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. On that specific point, procurement is an issue. It's an area which I've been very interested in for a long time, and I was chair of LGSS for a period when procurement services were provided by LGSS to CCC and to other councils. And it has been my experience that generally members are not really that interested in the technicalities which are involved in the procurement process, but they need to be. And that's why giving a reminder to members about what the basics are about procurement is very, very valuable indeed. And it's especially important, it has to be said, for chairs and vice chairs of committees so that they're particularly aware of what the regulations are, what is acceptable, what is legal, what is not legal, and what is within our rules. So the more which can be done to try to increase the knowledge of members to give better oversight and better control, the better it will be. But I have to say, I think you will find it's a difficult task because it's very technical, and I think a lot of members aren't really that interested in those sorts of technicalities. But especially chairs and vice chairs, they need to be. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I agree with Chris, never, but I would say that one. How do others feel? Is that something that we could do as part of a members seminar? I don't think we would necessarily get an awful lot of take up, but at least we can offer it. And specifically chairs, vice chairs, as you've suggested, but maybe lead members from opposition parties as well, so that they are involved were we to have a spokes type meeting. Councillor Murphy.
Yes, I think awareness is very helpful. Excuse me. I think awareness would be very helpful for members, but there is a sense of a little knowledge being a dangerous thing, and this is a technical area. So I think we will always very much rely on officers' advice on this.
You said the head of procurement is online somewhere.
Yes, Henry, I don't know if you wanted to add anything at this point in terms of some of the controls and procedures that operate in procurement on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I'm interim. Can you hear me? I'm interim head of procurement. I've worked at lots of other councils, and I'll be leaving in January because we've managed to recruit a really good permanent head of recruitment. So that's good news. While I've been here, I've been looking at our processes and procedures, and I believe that simplicity is the answer. So I have completely rewritten the contract procedure rules and reduced them from 30 pages to 6, which are going to committee in January. I'm also in the process of finalising a simple procurement guide, which explains how you have to do procurement. And we've got lots of standardised documents now that we've introduced as well. And one of the key documents, the most important thing in procurement is planning. And we've introduced a procurement plan, which I believe should be part of any committee paper that proposes a procurement, which actually says, these are the options and the different ways we can procure. These are the pros and cons of each of those. These are the risks in procurement. And this is what our recommendation is to actually take it forward. So everybody is really clear on how we're going to do a procurement. And for me, that is almost the most important thing, that we get it clear at the beginning, because the most difficult thing in a public sector procurement is you can't actually change the process halfway through. So you have to get it right at the very beginning. And that includes something that I think we're going to be talking about later, is how we're going to evaluate the award of that contract as well. Comes in at the planning stage. It's all got to be agreed before we actually advertise.
Excellent, thank you. I think we all agree with that, and a 6-page simplistic guide is ideal, and that's so much easier to work through than 30. Okay, any on Edna?
Just on a slightly different point, I agree that there are a number of measures which need to be taken to really try to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and mandating training, etc., is part of the picture. But in the event that there is an error, is there not a feedback loop to the individual who contributed to it? Because that may be, despite the mandated training, etc., there may be a performance issue, and that feedback loop, I think, is incredibly important to have as a kind of backstop. I mean, we'll have another situation potentially, but if we can also tackle the individual performance issues, if there are any, then that is also a guarantee of improvement in future.
Yes, I'd absolutely agree with that. It's a professional requirement for officers to meet these obligations to follow the law. Quite frankly, yes, that feedback does happen. I think there are instances where less serious than this, where where I'm conscious that that has happened. Obviously, the issues we're looking at here, a number of the officers, the key officers, have actually all moved on. But I take the point in general terms that it's essential to learn lessons and feed that directly back to those involved.
Well, that's sort of why I asked the leading question of Lisa as to what should we do with officers or members who were involved previously, and the extent to which we look back with the benefit of hindsight, even though Mr. Mason raised these objections several years ago and drew it to our attention, it is only now coming to committee. Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm not looking for a witch hunt, I have to say, as far as this is concerned, although I do believe that there aren't that many individuals who were involved in these, or should have been involved at a more senior level in these particular issues, who are still or are going to be continuing officers, or for that matter, indeed, members of this council. But I know that you have very kindly accepted an amendment which I've put forward to the recommendations on 6B with some improvements. Thank you very much indeed, Chair. And no doubt those will be circulated or read out to members shortly. And I do accept that council systems have improved since the times that we're talking about here, although it is disappointing that there hasn't been that much training for officers since then, or additional training. And I have to say that officers, there are dozens and dozens of officers who have to get involved in this, in procurement issues, and they cannot be expected to be procurement specialists. So the easier their job is made to ensure that they first of all identify that there's a potential issue, and secondly understand the right way of going about getting assistance to get that issue addressed, the more that can be done, the better it will be. And yes, we talked about members' lack of knowledge, and I think the more members can have greater knowledge and understanding of the principles behind procurement, the better. But also, we've got to be careful that there isn't too much delegation which takes place to officers. It is important that we continue to have the significant procurement contracts brought before the committees themselves, so that committee members can see, and for that matter, members of the public can see, to the extent that those things are public. But it can be seen that the processes are being followed and are being followed properly. On the subject of procurement, though, there are other issues which aren't illegal necessarily, but which nevertheless are areas where we could have significant improvement, and we need to be aware of risk. One of those is extensions to contracts. Now, when a procurement exercise takes place, it is normally for a specific period of a contract, sometimes with the possibility of an additional period beyond that, which is part of the contract. But for various reasons, normally very good reasons, of course, practical reasons, but for various reasons, it is not at all uncommon for us to seek to extend those contracts. And in fact, we've got one contract coming up at Adults and Health next week, where a second extension is being sought. Having already had a 6-month extension, they're now seeking a further 15-month extension. Now, I'm not saying that that was illegal, far from it, but what I am saying is that when we have extensions, the danger is the more extensions you have, the less you're able to demonstrate that you continue to be receiving value for money for the services which are being provided. And we need to be very well aware of that danger, because we as members have a responsibility to ensure that we're getting the best value for money in contracts. And if you do extend a contract and then extend it again beyond the original scope, the danger is that value for money assurance starts to become lost. And the second area which I have concerns about is the variable sensitivity of the scoring systems which are used so far as procurement exercises are concerned. And that might sound like an awfully arcane area to mention, but let me give you an example. When I was previously on the Health Committee, I think you might have been on the Health Committee at the same time, Chair, I'm not sure. But when I was previously on the Health Committee, I took one particular contract, one particular procurement process apart in terms of its scoring processes, and put it back together again just to see what the reality was behind the numbers we were being given. Because we as members were told this procurement is going to be assessed, and determined 60% on the basis of quality and 40% on the basis of price. Fair enough on face value. But because of the variable sensitivity of the scoring systems used for price and for quality, in practice, what actually was being done was that it was being assessed 97% on quality and 3% on price. Now, that could have serious consequences were it not for the fact that the bidder which was best on quality was also the bidder which was best on price. So there was no doubt at all about which bidder should receive that particular contract. But the officers didn't really appreciate how the scoring system skewed in that particular case the assessment which is being made from a fairly even balance between quality and price to something where price was almost irrelevant. So there's quite a number of issues, quite apart from the legalities that have been talked about at BDO, to do with procurement, which I believe it's important for this committee to have in mind and consider how there can be improvements so far as the council is concerned. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bowden. Tom or Henry, do you want to comment on whether your procedures, for example, include extensions and guidance on scoring systems?
I might let Henry comment in a moment on scoring and evaluation, and that isn't an issue that's identified in this report, but Councillor Bowden is right to raise it. On member involvement and decision making, I do think there are much stronger processes in place and well established and well understood procedures across the council that key procurement decisions above the key decision threshold of 500k have to go to committee. And members will know that they see that very regularly in all committees, permission to commence procurement. So which makes it all the more astonishing that this contract that exceeds £5 million in the case of winter gritting didn't go through that procedure properly in 2015. I think on extensions, again, that needs to follow the key decision threshold, and as Councillor Bowden would alluded to, there are trade-offs, and sometimes there are good reasons for extensions, whether that's aligning with a broader range of contracts or ensuring that the market is ready and well placed to bid and to provide the most effective response and ensure we get value for money from that route. But there's no getting away from the further, in general terms, the further you get from a procurement process, the more risk that you're facing that you aren't achieving value for money. I think that's all I'm saying. I don't know if Henry does want to comment on the valuation and scoring.
Henry, is there anything you'd like to say about the scoring systems and evaluation?
A couple of bits, if you wouldn't mind, because there is actually some good news. The fact that we have our contract register in ERP means that we can actually pick up where we're getting to the level of the contract. So variation, where we've got variations and they go above the original value of the contract, it's now visible. And this is really good and quite unusual in councils. So we mustn't beat ourselves up and think we're the worst people in the world, because actually I think we have the potential of being one of the better councils with regard to that. Also, our waiver system is absolutely excellent. It needs tying in a bit more, but it actually, people do fill in waivers and it gives us real transparency of where people are doing variations, extensions. So actually, we have a lot of them, but that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I agree totally with Councillor Bowden regarding extending contracts, and if the contract is not gets extended numerous times, then we aren't going to get value for money. And that goes back to this planning, making sure we're ahead of the game. We get notifications when contracts are coming a year before they're finishing to make sure officers can actually start thinking about what are we going to do about it, rather than getting to 10 minutes before it's ended and saying, oh dear, we need to extend it. And sometimes when we let a contract, we actually plan extensions because actually it is the best thing to do. So if it's been planned into the contract and we've allowed extensions, then could be a good thing. And each time it needs to be looked at in a rounded manner to actually decide that that's the right thing or the wrong thing to do.
Okay, thanks very much, Henry. Simon.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've listened with great interest to this. I've come into this very late, so I've probably got a couple of very stupid suggestions or thoughts that occur to me. One is, as part of the procurement policy that is being, or that has been redrafted, would it be possible to include some standard questions that members ought to be asking when a contract comes before them? So that, you know, I mean, I'm perhaps being naive again, but it seems to me that a contract is a contract is a contract. So it shouldn't be impossible to come up with some standard questions for councillors, because we're not well, I'm certainly not an expert. Councillor Bowden is, I'm not. So that was one suggestion. The other one was, I'm a member of Highways and Transport, and of course, that's particularly relevant in the discussion of this winter gritting contract. Would it be an idea, perhaps, just for committees to have as a standing agenda item on their future agenda plan, procurement or procurement contracts, so that that triggers the thought process in all of us on those committees to ask the question, are there any contracts coming up that we need to see and approve? So I don't know if those suggestions make any sense, but if they don't, you're free to tell me. Thank you.
I certainly think putting it on future agenda items, future major procurement exercises or something similar to demonstrate that it's above the delegated powers limit. And that way chairs and others can keep an eye on when we're expecting big contracts to come forward. Whether the procedures for officers on how to handle a procurement needs to include a separate item on members' responsibilities and questions. I think we need to take that away and think whether it is dealt with separately. But I agree, Simon, it's something which members who are less familiar with this need to have the ability to be able to ask challenging questions, and the right challenging questions rather than something that's a bit odd. Do you want to come back?
Chair, I think that, you know, the buck ultimately with a bigger contract stops with us as members. And so I think we need to be in the best possible position, especially those of us who don't have the expert knowledge, to ask the right questions. So I would appreciate it if perhaps you could consider that. Thank you, Chair.
No, good thought. Any other comments, questions? So if we get to the recommendations plus the amendment that Councillor Bowden sent through, there are 3 recommendations in our paper on page 111, where we're recommended to receive the report, note and comment on the response, which we've done, and draw this matter to the attention of full council in December, which we will do through the annual report. So I'm assuming everybody's comfortable with those, and then we'll come on to your amendment. Yeah. So then the amendment which Chris put forward, that Alison Whelan has tweaked and Simone has subsequently tweaked, and then I've discussed with Chris and we tweaked again, but we've done it with the intention of trying to ensure that it is clear and we are committing to the sorts of things which we've been discussing about monitoring delivery of procurement, not just contracts, but extensions as well. So if I read out what I think is the final version of the double tweaked amendment, and at some stage I'll give it to Dawn for the notes. So item D, include as an annual agenda item at a meeting of the Audit and Accounts Committee the following: 1, the number and descriptions of current and future procurement exercises and resultant contracts and extensions that are awarded, and any numbers that fail to meet council and legal requirements. Little 2, the number of extensions to contractual scopes and or periods with justification for such extensions. And little 3, that training is provided and reported to this committee for both members and for relevant officers of the impact of variability sensitivity of scoring systems in determining procurement exercises. And little 4, that the role and appropriate balance between member and involvement and officer delegation in the planning, execution and determination of procurement exercises is adequately documented. Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. If I could suggest a tweak to number 3, please. At the moment, you're only asking for training on the impact of variable sensitivity of scoring systems, whereas I think what Councillor Bowden was saying is that that's part of it, but actually what you want is training on the procurement process and its legal requirements, including consideration of the impact of variable sensitivity of scoring systems. Am I right?
Exactly.
May I suggest just adding to that then the words as part of an overall training package relating to procurement. So as part of an overall training package relating to procurement.
Are there any other thoughts, Simone?
Did you put my tweak in? I didn't hear it.
I think I did in little 1, the number, and I called it descriptions because I couldn't think of a better word.
Because what I'm trying to understand is I want the exemptions, the waived procurements highlighted, because I still think it's very important that we see these and the reason that you know they're exempt. So, and you know, this needs to come back to the committee that is highlighted, that the exemptions are highlighted.
Exactly. So
yeah,
I couldn't think of a better word for the names of the contracts without going into a long-winded thing. So I just called it descriptions.
right.
So it would be the numbers and descriptions of current and future procurement exercises and resulting contracts and extensions that are awarded, and any numbers that fail to meet council and legal requirements.
Oh, sorry, Chair. What did you say? Exemptions or extensions?
I said extensions.
And exemptions.
Because, well, exemptions will mean that they will fail to meet the legal requirements.
Chairman, perhaps you could add the word waivers in there,
Yeah.
just to cover that point. So the number and descriptions of current and future procurement exercises and resultant contracts, waivers and extensions, I think would cover that point.
Go on, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Simone's comments were very helpful. I think that both in terms of number 1 and number 2, when we do perform this for the first time, I think the committee will be shocked by the length of the list which is produced. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it will show the scope of the potential for things which we need to investigate. But we're not going to solve this whole problem in one fell swoop. It's a long-term thing, not a short-term thing. So very much welcome these as first steps. And I think that this will evolve naturally once we see the level of procurement work which does involve waivers or does involve extensions. I think that will itself cause us to ask certain questions which will lead to better processes than we've got at the moment. Thank you.
Nick.
Yes, so although I will be supporting the amendment as amended, I must say the Part D struck me as being a little bit like bolting the stable door after the horse has run off. And if I was really being cynical, that it's a classical attempt at blame shifting. These failures are yet another legacy issue, as they happened under the previous Conservative-led regimes. Needs to be emphasised that the joint administration has taken prompt action to remediate and implement all of BDO's recommendations. We will keep the new procurement processes under review and ensure that no such failures can occur in the future. As the BDO representatives have said, the council has responded robustly to the recommendations that they have made. And in my view, the principal mechanism of ensuring this does not happen in the future is the appropriate oversight by internal audit and reporting on a regular basis to this committee. So I think we really need to draw a line under this issue and move forward, ensuring that it never happens again.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Chris.
May I state as a matter of generality that it's probably inappropriate and unhelpful for this for the Audit and Accounts Committee to be party politicized in any way, and utilizing the Audit and Accounts Committee in a party political way is not necessarily helpful to what we all should be trying to do, which is to improve the processes which exist and to make sure that we collectively work for the benefit of the council as a whole. Thank you.
Simon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My feelings are very much the same. However tempting it might be to score cheap political points, it's worth just remembering that this committee was chaired by a member of the opposition when these failings took place, and that the officers involved in the Highways Department have left. So all of this is quite a long time ago, and it was actually the last administration that was instrumental in having a restructure of the senior management of highways. So I think that to try and apportion blame is inappropriate and completely uncalled for. And I think we just need to look forward, which we have done. Well, all of us, with one exception, have done that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move on? So we have an amendment which has had several tweaks that with Fiona's help, we now have a version that hopefully she and Dawn will be able to include in the minutes. Are we all content with that? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Lisa and Barry, for doing this work for us. I know it's been a bit of a struggle at times, and it has taken us much longer than we were hoping, but we are there now and able to move on from it. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting or go as you see fit. Thank you. Let's move on then to the next item. And that is the arrangements for the appointment of external auditors from 2023 to 24, to 2023, 24 to 2027, 28. And can I ask Stephen Howarth, Assistant Director of Finance, to present this report?
Thank you, Chair. As you say, this report is dealing with the arrangements for the appointment of the Council's external auditors from 23-24 through to 27-28. So we'll have covered quite a range of years in this meeting. The external auditors of the Council are currently appointed by the Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, which is a subsidiary of the Local Government Association, under a national scheme specified in statute about the appointment of external auditors to local authorities and police bodies. Since 1890, or in 1890, we faced a choice as a local authority about how we appointed our external, or how we procured our external auditors, whether to opt into the national scheme under PSAA or to appoint or to procure our external auditor locally. At the time, the council decided to opt into the national arrangements, as did the vast majority of local authorities across the country. This year, PSA have been reappointed as the nominating body by the Secretary of State, and they've sent an invitation through to all local authorities to opt in to the next 5-year period of the national scheme. And we again face the choice as a council about whether we opt into that scheme or whether we procure our external auditor locally. If we do choose to appoint our external auditor locally, the council needs to establish an independent audit panel, which is comprised predominantly of independent members, i.e. not councillors, to sort of undertake and oversee that procurement relationship. The paper sets out a bit more detail and background, and also you'll see the recommendation there is that we do opt in as a council back into those national arrangements for 3 main reasons. We do think it is a more cost-effective solution, or likely to be a more cost-effective solution. The economies of scale from a national procurement are likely to be there, and we would not face the costs of setting up an independent audit panel, which were quantified several years ago, costing potentially £15,000 to set up and then more to maintain. We think there's more probability of guaranteeing the appointment of a professional and regulated auditor is likely to be, those firms are likely to focus on the national procurement ahead of any smaller local procurements. And we also think there's probably a lack of benefits in appointing our external auditor locally. We wouldn't necessarily have any more control over the form or contents or timeliness of the audit, and would we necessarily want to? So this is ultimately a decision for full council to take per the invitation letter from PSAA, but that would be off the back of a recommendation from this committee, which is what the paper is about. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Any comments? I'm hoping we just agree that this is a sensible way to go, that we should opt into the sector-led approach. Yes, done. Thank you very much. Well, what's the mechanism for going to full council then?
I believe it's on full council's agenda for December as a matter raised at audit committee. I'm not sure who then presents it, Dawn, but it might be yourself, Councillor Wilson.
Well, I guess I do. Well, that would be the least controversial one ever. Brilliant. It's not just part of the annual audit report then, it's a separate item. Dawn.
It is a separate item, I believe.
Okay, good. I want no trouble over there.
Chair, I will declare the same interest
Oh, you
full council as I've
everything.
declared
Okay.
today, much though I would like to comment.
Yeah, so right. Well, we're all in favour, but Councillor Bowden abstained. Thank you very much. Let's move on then. Neil, we're on to your item, I think, about the Audit and Accounts Committee annual report 2020-21. Would you like to present it as head of audit and risk management?
Thank you, Chair. I shall indeed. Yeah, this is to present the draft Audit and Accounts Committee annual report 2021, and it summarises the committee's annual work programme and hopefully to be presented at the December meeting of full council. I'm presenting today on behalf of the chair of the Audit and Accounts Committee, whose report it will be when it goes to committee on the 14th of December. As I said, it's a summary of the work of the committee to the 31st of the 3rd, 21, and it's intended to give assurances to full council and other stakeholders that the committee has fulfilled its responsibilities outlined in 1.5 of the report. I think to save time, the report's fairly self-explanatory, and as such, I don't intend to go through it in any detail, but obviously would draw your attention to 323 to 325 of the report, which relates to the BDO review of objections raised in respect to the 2016-17 and 17-18 accounts, which you just discussed in great detail. As the items on the agenda today, we're hoping to take away any outcomes from those discussions and maybe reflect that within the report to give council more assurance that the committee has fulfilled its responsibility in that regard. And I think with that, Chair, I would leave it open to questions and comments.
Thank you, Neil. Apart from the section on the farms audit, because I think we'll probably come back to that under our confidential item, are there any comments or questions that anybody's got on Neil? Nick?
I was just wondering if you could comment on the items in the summary that refer to this land and how we can consider them in the future in relation to the review that's being carried out at the moment.
That would be the next item. I think that's the internal audit progress report. You're too enthusiastic, Nick. Well, don't forget that, right? But we will come back to it.
Consider it.
Edna.
Thank you. I was really interested to read this. I wonder if on page 131, 3.3.1, there's a topic of whistleblowing. And I wonder how many ongoing cases there are. You talk about concluded cases, but I'm interested in how many are ongoing.
I believe that's in the next report. If it's not, I can email you the actual number of cases. But I believe we give the number of cases in the internal audit progress report, which is the next agenda item.
Yeah. So through the chair, I believe, I thought that was the case, but I just wanted to check because I wasn't sure if it did relate to that.
For the report that goes to full council, I think it would be helpful just to include the approximate number that are ongoing, just so we get an idea of the workload, I think is what Edna's suggesting. Any other comments, questions? Seemed pretty comprehensive, complete to me. No? Okay, thank you. So we're asked to note and comment on the report as we have done. Right, excellent. And that will then go to the full council meeting on the 14th of December. Yeah, thank you. So now we're on to the internal audit progress report. And Neil, would you like to present the report and mention what's happening about this land?
I'll pick this land up, Chair, certainly. So this report is to report on the main areas of audit coverage for the period to the 5th of November. And as committee will be aware, this comes as a standard, as a standing item to each of your meetings. And just for background, again, the role of internal audit is to provide the audit committee, audit accounts committee, and management independent assurance on the effectiveness of internal controls to make sure that the council's objectives are achieved. The county councils.
Neil, could you just move the microphone slightly closer to you, and then people watching on YouTube, I'm sure there's hundreds, will be able to hear you better.
Let's hope not. So yeah, we've obviously taken this report to the county council's JMT, joint management team, and they considered the report on the 18th of November 2021 prior to the submission here today. Just before we get into the report, at every meeting I've been asked to give a highways audit update. We're doing a fairly major piece of work with our highways contractor to retrospectively look at the fan reconciliation and accounts that have been raised. We're hoping to get that work done by the end of November, but timescales are getting very, very tight, it's fair to say. But we are hoping to bring a full report to this committee in February 2022. Which will complete the audit to March 2020. And as I think has been reported in the past, we've managed to recover some over recovered monies in the past and to date. The other areas that probably we need to bring to your attention is I think we've alluded to it before, we are doing a fairly major piece of work on the compliance to our contract procedurals in response to the BDO report, and obviously some of the comments that have been made today. We're going to ensure are covered in our final report to you in February 2022 regarding compliance. So I think it was excellent discussion, and one or two other ideas we will certainly pick up as part of our audit. Going into the report itself, it's a standard report, so page 141 just outlines our reporting process and also explains how we give our assurances, just to make sure that everyone's aware of what the audit opinions mean. Section 3 is a summary of finalised assignments since the last audit report, and you can see there's been a number of finalised assignments. We have one draft report that's out there for review at the moment. I can say at this stage that no reports that are finalised or in draft from the period are limited or no assurance. So that's positive, and that's why section 4 is very blank, because we haven't got such audits. Section 5 is just a flavour of the type of work that we've been doing as an advisory service. Then we get into the sort of main body of the report, which is the audit forward planning for the next 4 quarters. And we feel this is probably the most important part of the report to be challenged, because it's asking JMT first and then members of this committee, does this reflect where you think your audit resource should be targeted to look at the control environment and give you assurance across the organisation? Section 7 is also important. It explains the extent to which audit recommendations in previous reports have been implemented. There are a large number of management actions outstanding. However, that's maybe artificially high because of the 27 recommendations that are now outstanding for the capital programme governance review that was completed last year. The due date for implementation was 30th of June, but there's been an extension to that requested by the director to the 31st of January. And page 171 of the report gives detail at Appendix B as to the current position and the rationale for that delay. But it's rather to do with recruitment of the new management team within the service. The plan will be to audit the compliance with the recommendations in the final quarter of this financial year. So it'll be sort of February, March time, if that target's been achieved. There is actually one outstanding essential recommendation, which is the AIDS debt report. That was on the last committee report. A lot of work has been done, but it hasn't quite been finalised, and that's been extended to the 31st of March 22. And again, a request from the service. Section 9 is a fraud and corruption update and gives you a flavour for the open cases, and I think I mentioned that in the last item. And then finally, Appendix B is the detailed narrative around the outstanding recommendations. And then Appendix C, we were asked to keep giving regular updates to this committee on the NFI initiative and the extent to which we are working through the number of matches, and that's the latest position there. That's a quick canter through the report. Happy to take questions, challenges, opinions. Thank you.
Have I missed it? Where is Appendix A?
I did mention Appendix A. Good question. Appendix A, sadly, has been omitted from the papers. I found out about 5 to 2, so I haven't had much time to do. I should have mentioned it. And actually, it's our error. It absolutely wasn't. Don't worry, it absolutely wasn't Democratic Services. I think because it was called Appendix A. The actual report, Appendix A itself, Appendix A to the report wasn't included with the papers. We can circulate that at the end of the meeting by email. And Appendix A just gives a summary of the work that we've done to date. So it is useful, but it's not integral to the report particularly.
No, exactly, because I on the version that we discussed pre the meeting, I recall there was something in, I thought it was Appendix A, which said delayed because directors requested a delay. And so I was looking for it and couldn't find it, but I'm pleased that it wasn't me being gormless and you had actually missed it. But it doesn't, as you say, I don't think it's material to what we're discussing today.
No, it's not. It's absolutely my error, and apologies for that, Chair.
Right, no matter.
Thank you, Chair. As has been highlighted, the most important part of this really is the current proposed flexible internal audit plan for the next 4 quarters. And I've got 3 questions. Would it be helpful for me to ask them separately to highlight them rather than all together? The first is on the first quarter, the final item on the first quarter, the procurement team oversight of major procurement compliance. And I found that interesting, where it said that despite the recommendation from a previous audit that a monthly report of purchase orders above £100,000 raised in the previous month is extracted from ERP and compared to the known contracts that have been created to check, that is not now going to take place so far as the procurement section is concerned, and that internal audit is going to perform compliance testing instead. Compliance testing, I believe, effectively means this process isn't going to be done in full each month. Or am I misunderstanding what you mean by compliance testing? Are you going to do the test which was originally requested, which is a monthly test, or are you going to do some form of spot check to ensure that, or to give some degree of assurance that compliance is taking place?
I think that is both. We will do a full compliance. At the moment, we're doing a full compliance test on a sample of 25 contracts that have been commissioned, and we'll bring the results of that directly in response to the BDO report for February. But we are also going to put in place some spot checks, as you've just alluded to, in the audit programme going forward, if I've understood you correctly. That is. So compliance test is just to make sure that the key controls that have been outlined are not just in place theoretically, but are being complied with routinely in practice, because that's where procurement tends to go wrong. Governance is normally in place and we can give a good governance assurance, systems assurance. It's the extent to which those key controls are being complied with that makes the difference to good governance. An audit will be reviewing those, as we do every year actually, but even more so in light of the recent report from BDO.
I'm grateful for that. That is consistent with what I would have expected from a compliance test. The problem is that what we are talking about here is a failure to carry out a recommendation from a previous audit about an absolute test, an actual a process which should take place on a monthly basis. And my understanding is now that process will not be taking place. It'll neither be undertaken by procurement, nor will that process be undertaken by internal audit. Now, I wouldn't say it's generally internal audit's responsibility to carry out such a process, but my fear is that the intent from that recommendation from a previous audit is not being fulfilled here.
Tom or Henry, if he's still on the line, do you want to comment on that, or do you want to take it away?
Yeah, I think we do need to take it away. That certainly I wasn't aware that we were stepping away from that that responsibility, and I agree with Councillor Bowden in view of the last recommendation of the last report. It's all the more important, so we'll certainly have a look at that.
Thanks. You, and
I'm happy with that. Thank you, Chair. If that could be put down as an action to be followed up for the next meeting, so that at least we can see that what the result is of the work done by officers outside this meeting, I'd be really grateful.
Indeed.
So that was my first one.
Yep.
My second one was on the second quarter, and it intrigued me because I was the predecessor of Councillor Murphy as a shareholder representative on what was then LGSS Law Limited, and is now Pathfinder Legal Services Limited. And I was intrigued by the 20 days you are putting aside for a client-side review of the relationship with Pathfinder Legal Services Limited. And I just wonder if you could expand a little bit on what it is that you would be testing in 20 days worth of work, exactly what it is that you would be testing. Thank you.
The days are indicative. Obviously, we may spend less or more depending on the emerging findings. But what we'll be looking at is the contract management arrangements between the council and Pathfinder. Just because it's sort of part of our family, we still should expect robust contract management arrangements between, to make sure we're getting value for money, to ensure that we've got the right key performance indicators against some of their services, and to make sure that we're paying the right amount at the right time. And I think in the past that there maybe has been some areas where we could improve as an organisation, as I'm sure Pathfinder could as well. So it's to look at the client side, our side, are we getting value for money from Pathfinder, and are we paying the right amount at the right time for their advice and other services.
Okay, thank you very much. And I must admit, I do agree that there have been occasions in the fairly recent past where we haven't been fulfilling the requirements that we have about paying at the right time. So I appreciate that that's incorporated within that. The third item isn't on the list, and I'm a little bit surprised that it isn't, and you may tell me it's going to be incorporated within everything that you do anyway. But nothing is specifically mentioned in here about the effect of COVID-19. and there have been some direct effects and many unfortunate indirect effects. The direct effects, of course, are the additional work which has been involved, which is specifically to do with COVID-19, and the additional monies which have flown through from central government for COVID-19. And the indirect effects are legion and have affected virtually every service that we've got. Now, that is not being shown as a separate item being considered. And I would assume that somehow you're going to incorporate some awareness of the risks involved in all of that within all of the work which is done. But I wonder if you could expand on that, please.
I can go back to what happened last year. Obviously, when COVID hit, we obviously were integral in the risk management of the effects and the trigger of that particular pandemic. We also looked at any payment over £20,000 going out of the organisation to ensure that it was supported. We also, through contract audit, obviously there was a thing called PPN or 220, which was a technical term for if COVID had cost the organizer or cost the contractor more. You know, if COVID had made delivery of the service more expensive than previously tendered for, then they could apply to the council for additional funds, effectively, and an internal audit set up the governance procedures, and there's a panel. Actually, it's still in place to have a look at any financial effects that we'd need to reimburse contractors for. And as part of that, obviously, as part of our contract audit work, we're very clear that we need to understand whether or not the claims being made in relation to COVID, the additional costs of COVID are being supported. So you could have areas where perhaps you've had furlough as an example, want to make sure that we're not paying, for example, some of the already refunded part of those costs to the contractor. So we are aware of COVID as one of the things that we need to look at during all audits. So we haven't got a specific. I don't know how we'd audit COVID-19 as a thing. So it's a bit like VFM. You know, whenever we do audit, we have a look to see, well, can we think of a way to make that more efficient and effective and get better value for money for the organisation, same as fraud. You know, we have a look and think, actually, is the system good enough to reasonably protect us against fraud? And COVID is just another one of those current examples that we have to be aware of and ensure that we are auditing any impact that COVID may have. It's probably not a great answer, but that's how we're sort of doing it.
Chris.
Sorry, I don't agree that it's not a great answer. I thought it was a very good answer. But there are consequences that there have been to COVID-19 which don't naturally fit into any normal area to be checked. And I'll give you just one example, which is right off the top of my head. The appropriateness of the amount of working at home which is taking place by staff, whether there's too much or too little. I'm not making a judgment on this, I have to say, but it seems to be a very reasonable thing for internal audit to question whether the processes that we've undergone and where we have now got to, whether that is appropriate or whether something has gone wrong in one direction or another. And I don't see how something like that will come into your audit plan.
Neil, we do have a county-wide risk register, which COVID is one of the key risks, isn't it? And are there various mitigating factors that we should be looking at to see how they are helping or hindering the business of the county?
Yeah, I think that was true this time. Last year, we had a very specific COVID risk, but we migrated away from having a COVID risk sort of earlier on this year because it's more like business as usual now. COVID is part of the norm, but you're quite right. So things like business continuity, you know, that's you know, COVID has made us really address our business continuity plans to ensure that, you know, in a pandemic we can continue giving services to those in need, and that's been very well covered in the current corporate risk register. So business continuity plans, business as usual, is very much to the fore, and audit is ensuring that business continuity plans are in place. I think another area that I would throw out there is the impact within contracts of trying to sort of catch up with some of the outcomes that we were expecting to have. So an accelerated program of work. Well, how do we control that and still get VFM and audits part of those discussions to ensure that we're still achieving VFM and getting value for our book, if you like. So we are heavily involved, and I'm very pleased to say that I think directors ask Audit to be involved with those type of conversations as a critical friend, or the grit in the machinery, or whichever way you want to put it. So I'm fairly confident that we are involved with that. But taking a specific area of working from home, that isn't something that I have in the plan, and I will take advice, but it's not something I see as, at the moment, hugely imperative that Audit gets involved with. I think the way that would become obvious is if our key performance indicators as an organisation are not being met. So if we see a detrimental impact on our KPIs, then at that point, we would, as an organisation, we'd look and say, well, what's causing that? And it could be any number of reasons, but one of those may well be the working arrangements. So I think that would come out in the wash through the corporate performance indicators.
Okay,
Chair, thank you. That was a very interesting answer, because it was not what I would have looked at. I'm interested. Your perspective there is primarily on the outcomes and on KPIs, which wasn't what I was thinking about, but really interesting that you should identify that. I was thinking more in terms of value for money, and are we achieving as much value for money as we could? Are we spending too much, too little? Has there been proper management review of working from home? And questions such as that are not ones which we can easily as members ask in any context, or we can ask them and we get very generic answers. And I'd thought internal audit would be the ideal medium to consider whether management has got the balance right. And I know it's an ever evolving balance, but have we got that right or not? I personally would love to see a totally electronic council. I'd love to see it so that we had people working from home. We had just a council chamber which was virtual as well. Not that's legally permitted at the moment, but that's merely my personal inclination. But it does seem to me to be a legitimate and very large question. So that's the only reason I raised it.
Thank you very much. Neil, I think you and I might have a bit of a think about that and see whether there is something specific that we need to do some work on. Simon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is probably, again, a very naive and foolish question. I was just looking at the KPIs that are listed in Appendix B under summary of outstanding recommendations. Those recommendations, what impact will they have upon the highways contract KPIs, if any?
Neil, have you found those?
Is that page 155 that you're talking about? 155. Yeah, I mean, that isn't specifically about the KPIs in the highways contract, but I can answer that if you'd like me to about the highways contracts. If there's a specific question there.
Chair, I've long been concerned about the appropriateness of the KPIs that we and our contractors work to. So I would welcome any comment you have. Thank you.
Okay, we are obviously undertaking quite a detailed review of the highways contract, and part of that is to ensure that the KPIs are being monitored effectively, and to make sure that they're being used as levers to improve or continually improve the performance of that particular contract. I think there is a review taking place at the moment to look again, along with the contractor, at the appropriateness and the value that some of those KPIs are giving this organisation. So I think it's something we could easily bring back here in February. To give you some assurance that the KPIs in that major contract are effective and working well. But at the moment, I can say that is an ongoing piece of work that Audit is involved with, but it is being led by the service through their commercial board with the contractor.
Is that okay, Simon, that we come back in February?
I was going to say, Chair, I won't be here in February. Well, I might be, who knows? But I'm sure that Councillor Bowden and other colleagues will pick up the cudgels on this, because I really do have serious concerns about the appropriateness of the KPIs that our contractors are expected to work to. They're just too easy, really. That's the bottom line.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Councillor Murphy.
Yes, thank you. Question I was interested in whether there was internal audit work planned, but I didn't see it, and that just may be me not seeing it, or it might not be there for very good reason. But the sort of area that interests me is it's possibly part of contracting. It's not so much procuring services and so on and goods for ourselves, but it's contracting with funders, contracting money in to do work. And I wonder, is that part of the procurement process, or is that a different sort of thing? Because there's a huge amount of money flowing into the county council, and it is on certain terms and conditions. And I've only been a member for a short time, but I have seen examples where there was some uncertainty about what the terms were and so on. So I sort of thought that might be a really interesting area. And of course, if you're thinking about markers for fraud, that would also be an area. So I just wondered what is it part of your thinking?
It hasn't been. Could you give me an example of the type of situation you're explaining? I'm struggling a little bit to see exactly what the area is. Sorry, it's probably me.
Well, I think I probably don't have full information to give a good description of a specific example, but for example, there is a large amount of funding that comes from the combined authority to do project work of some description. And it's really to know how detailed a fix we have as the body receiving the money, of the amount of money and the terms on which it's given, and then the basis on which we then spend that money and report back to the funder. So that's I'm harking back to my university grant manager sort of roles, where there's quite a lot of intense focus of sort of contractual terms and conditions there. Although we're not procuring, well, probably on the back of it, we're procuring services and so on, but this is also about our relationship with funders.
Apologies, I was being really daft. It's a perfectly good question, and it makes absolute sense. Yes, we do audit grants, and we often have to sign the grants off to give assurance to those funders that the monies have been spent in accordance with the terms and conditions. And also, as part of some of our contract audit, if it's from a combined authority, we also ensure that through contract audit that the grant conditions have been met if it is a jointly funded project. Many apologies, I just had a mental block on the angle of the question, so I can give you full assurance that we do an awful lot of grant audit work.
And I think there is reference in one of your reports to Section 106 monies, isn't there? And the looking into what that's spent on and whether we're maximising the income that we might get. So that would be another example. And EY is looking at the GCP monies that we've got and whether that's been accounted for correctly or not. Was there anything else, Tom? No? Okay. Any other comments? No, we haven't dealt with this land, I don't think.
Perhaps I could just expand on it a bit before I get accused of bringing politics into politics again. My concern about this is that we have information that's very pertinent to our consideration of what's going on in this land in the internal audit. We also have a separate review, and I'm concerned that there could be a siloing effect. I would like to think that we're going to bring all the pieces of evidence together. And I was just wondering, this is to you as well, whether the whole issue will come to this committee or to Strategy and Resources, or how it's going to be overseen. Because irrespective of party politics, I think there are some very serious issues that need to be looked at in relation to this land.
Well, I'm certainly intending that it should come to Audit and Accounts. The CNIC, or whatever it was, doesn't exist any longer, and Strategy and Resources has taken that responsibility on. So they asked for the review to be undertaken, but I'm still expecting it to come here as well. Is that your anticipation? But I don't know when. And that was one of the questions I was going to be asked, because it does say on page 165, revised target to be confirmed. And I wonder whether we got any dates yet.
Yeah, just to give a short update on that. So the independent reviewer is doing a review rather than an audit, but that is due to be received by the leader and deputy leader in draft tomorrow. And then it will go through to Strategy and Resources Committee in January alongside an action plan. I think it's going to be a helpful piece of work in terms of setting out a number of risks and making clear where, giving guidance to the council about how that can be mitigated, putting some questions back around strategy and identifying areas for improvement. I think this committee will have a really important role in then monitoring that well, firstly, acknowledging those risks, and ensuring they've got appropriate kind of visibility in our corporate governance regime, and then monitoring their implementation and remedial action. I think there's an internal audit scheduled in for the first part of next year, which is quite well timed really, because we'll have the Avison Young report and then be able to see that followed up. Well, this committee will be able to take assurance from internal audit's work to see that followed up.
Okay, does that answer your question, Nick?
Yes, I think that's that sounds very satisfactory.
All right, thank you very much. So if there are no more questions, go on, Simon.
It's just a comment, Chair. I think it's entirely appropriate that the Joint Administration has a look at this land. You know, some of us have different views on it. Certainly, I supported it, and I hope that it will have a clean bill of health. But it's entirely appropriate to look at it, and I think the question that was asked is also entirely appropriate. So I'm certainly not going to start casting political brickbats around.
Thank you very much. Right, let's move on. We are asked to note and comment on the report, which we have done. Thank you. So we move on to item 10, which is a report on financial reporting and external audit update. I'm grateful that Mark has waited so patiently. And can I ask Stephen to present the financial bit, and then we'll go over to Mark for the progress on the external audit. Stephen.
Thank you. I'll probably briefly introduce both sections. First, it's a bit of a hodgepodge selection of things in this report. So firstly, it deals with the financial reporting, which the committee will recall has previously come as a standalone item following its presentation Strategy and Resources Committee that was discussed last time. We don't think that is bringing that much value. So I think that's going to stop at the end of this financial year. So I won't really introduce that anymore, except to say that the integrated finance monitoring report that was presented to Strategy and Resources Committee is linked in the document in the report to this committee. The key headline numbers from that are set out in the report, and the recommendations, or the main recommendations the Strategy and Resources Committee agreed, are also set out there as well. And then the rest of the report is an update on the progress of the external audit that is currently ongoing for 2021's accounts, which I'm sure Mark will speak to a bit as well. This was published a week ago when the papers were published for this committee. A week is quite a long time potentially in an external audit, but I think broadly what is in there is still true. Except there's a bit more progress been made in terms of which samples, etc., have been released to us and that we have responded to. But I will let Mark talk to that if he would like.
Mark, do you want to?
Thank you. I agree with everything Stephen said. The audit is going well and everything in the report is factually correct and things move at pace during on-site audit visits. But I would like to clarify for the minutes and this committee that contrary to any media reporting, EY have not yet concluded our audit. We have not yet reported any outcomes of our audit or concurred with any judgments management have made in preparing and publishing their draft financial statements. All of our conclusions and judgments will be formally reported in our audit results report at the appropriate point that we report them.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Chris.
Just to put Mark's mind at rest, few of us really believe a lot of what we read in the local press, which is misreported. I have two questions. The first is, and I fully appreciate that BDO haven't signed off their VFM reports yet, but assuming that they are in the process of signing those off as a result of what we heard today, what are the plans for the outstanding VFM reports for previous years and for that matter for 2020, 2021? What sort of timescale are we looking at there? And the second question is to do with the 2.2.8 report that the external auditor has received a single objection to the council's account by a local resident. Is that primarily a VFM point or is it a more fundamental to do with the figures?
Mark, do you want to cover those?
Certainly. So on point one, we have liaised with BDO over the last few months, so we do know what, or we were aware of the areas they were looking at as part of their work, and we have taken that into account in what we would probably need to look at in our work. So we have commenced some work already in respect of 2018-19 and 2019-20, because we would wish to conclude those as quickly as we can, but we equally have objections in respect of both those years, which have some crossover to both our value for money responsibilities and previously reported outcomes from BDO. So it will be a new year. Whether it's in time to coincide with our accounts report for this year's financial statements audit is too difficult to tell at this point. In respect of 2020-21, we are operating under a slightly altered regime because the National Audit Office have updated the requirements on auditors, and we are required to do a risk assessment before we commence that work, which we have not commenced yet because we want to get all of those out of the way, all the previous 4 or 5 years out of the way before we understand where our starting point is. So that is to follow. In respect of the objection, it covers a number of areas, some of which are linked to items of account, some of which are linked to value for money arrangements.
Go on, Chris.
Chair, is it appropriate to ask, or rather, is it appropriate for EY to disclose what the objections are?
I don't think there's any reason why you shouldn't if you are able to summarize them, Mark. Unless there is.
I think it would be more appropriate if a summary was provided for the minutes, because I can't recollect with significant accuracy to give it verbally right now.
Yeah, are you happy with that? And am I right in thinking that although somebody might submit an objection, you have to evaluate that objection and decide whether it is justifiable for you to consider in your materiality thresholds and all the rest of it, and you haven't yet done that?
Equally true, we need to determine whether it's a valid objection, which has a number of points over which we conclude its validity, and we have not determined whether it's a valid objection at this point.
So when we include in the minutes what the objections are, we will just include that statement. I would hate people to assume that because somebody has made an objection that means it is accepted by the external auditor and they will be looking into it because they may or they may not. Okay, thank you. Any other comments on that paper? No, so we are asked to note and comment on the report as we have done. Now my clock says 15:59, which means we're coming up to 2 hours. What I would suggest is that we just finish off this next item, and then we're planning to go into confidential session anyway. And then so at that point, we'll just before the confidential item, we'll have a 5-10 minute comfort break. Dawn, over to you on the agenda plan and anything else that you wish to say. Thank you.
I don't think there's anything to add to the agenda plan other than the annual procurement report, which was picked up under the BDO item. So nothing else from me.
Okay, people content with the agenda plan as it's come on, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Have you given any consideration to which of our meetings the annual report will come to do with procurement, please?
No. Neil, would you like to advise when would be an appropriate, or Tom, when would be an appropriate meeting for the annual report on procurement that we've previously agreed we're going to have? We'll come to.
So I'd say, as Henry mentioned earlier, we've got a new head of procurement starting in January, and I'm keen they have a careful look at this. So I'd suggest the May meeting would be the first opportunity that we can have a kind of detailed look at the current year that we're in.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's add it to the agenda plan so we don't forget. Excellent, thank you very much. So we have noted the committee agenda plan. Yep. And what we're going to do now is to move into private session, excluding the press and public. Members, do you agree with the proposal to move into private session? Thank you. So we agree, sorry, I have to read this out. Agree that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the report contains exempt information under paragraphs 1 and 5 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed in discussion, as it contains information relating to any individual and information in respect of which a claim to legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. As this is the final public item on the agenda, I would like to express my thanks to those members of the public and press who have taken the time to watch the meeting today via the County Council's website, and the broadcast will now end.